This is 9/11 Freefall.
Welcome to another episode of 9/11 Freefall. I'm your host, Andy Steele, and tonight it is my pleasure to be playing my latest interview. It is with Jeremy Sagan. He's a computer programmer. He's also the son of the late great science writer Carl Sagan and Lynn Margulis. And Lynn Margulis, if you remember, appears in 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out. She was a biologist, a very brilliant woman, great career she had. And she's talking about the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence in that movie, just like all the other experts are. And, of course, she had a lot to bring to the table, a lot of credibility behind her name, and just a great woman this lady was. And, unfortunately, I never got the chance to interview her. She passed away, I think, right before the show was created, so it just never happened. But it's great to have her son on this show and to bring his own perspective to this issue that we talk about every week. The fact that explosives brought down buildings 1, 2, and 7 of the World Trade Center complex, and we are continuing as we keep on talking, as we keep on reaching out to whoever we can, however we can. And here we go. Here's another example of why it's so important to get your voice to as many ears as possible. We reached Jeremy Sagan. So what I'm going to do tonight, because I was talking about Lynn Margulis just a moment ago, and I never did have the chance to interview her, like I said, after we do our moment of silence, I'm going to play some clips of Lynn from 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out, just so you can get an idea of who this woman was if you're not familiar, and what she really brought to the table with her testimony. So we're going to do our 10 seconds of silence now to remember the victims of 9/11 and their families and all the people who died in the wars that followed 9/11. And then I'm going to play those clips of Lynn Margulis and then the interview with her son, Jeremy Sagan. So we're going to start our 10 seconds of silence right now. And that is 10 seconds.
My name is Lynn Margulis. I've been doing science every day since I was about 16 years old. I teach at the University of Massachusetts. I have a PhD in genetics, but I really do much more geological things these days. In 1999, I was a recipient, one of several, of the President's Medal of Science from William Clinton, and 2 days ago, I received the Da Vinci Award, that is the membership in the Da Vinci Society, and quoting them, the society is for the study of thinking is proud to announce that they're giving me this award, and it is the goal of the society is to develop a world-class thinking curriculum and to promote excellence in thinking by developing an honor society for the world's greatest living thinkers. That's somewhat of an exaggeration, but they gave me that medal. I reconstruct the past, natural history, from clues taken to be representational, and that's exactly what we're doing with reconstructing of why the buildings were destroyed in 9/11. Taking clues that you think are representational. That's in a historical science, that's what must be done. The thing that's most important about science is that it's a way of knowing. And it's a way of knowing that anyone can participate in. Of course, they have to have some background and they always develop more. But it's a way of knowing about anything. And it's at the end of any kind of science activity, people will agree that they have collected evidence that illustrates a hypothesis, and if the evidence is contradictory to the hypothesis, one has to abandon that hypothesis and look for another one. And one must, in testing any hypothesis or trying to establish it, consider all of the relevant evidence, which may come from all kinds of places, observations, measurements, and so on. And insofar as people can be objective at all, they will come to the same sorts of conclusions. So science is a fundamentally useful and accurate and universal way of finding out about the world. So scientists always have to collect information, data, observations, and measurements around an idea that's being tested for its validity. And if all of those observations and measurements corroborate and are consistent with the basic idea, the idea then has got to be published and be available in an open and transparent way that others can criticize. If the hypothesis is really correct, the criticisms are stand up. That is, a scientist has no better friend than valid critics, appropriate critics to whom they respond. And if the criticisms lead to abandonment of the hypothesis because it doesn't fit, because the facts don't fit the idea, then the hypothesis must be abandoned and replaced with something more adequate. And as science goes on, the adequacy of the basic idea and the hypothesis is corroborated over and over again by lots of people from lots of angles, and usually generates sub-hypotheses or related ideas that can also be investigated. But of course, science is never secret when it's done right. And for the third one, it's a mysterious reason. That is, there's no really coherent hypothesis, except it's claimed that there are these fires in them. Now, the most obvious hypothesis for anyone looking at the films, and that was a lot of people, is that the buildings came down because there was very carefully controlled demolition with high explosives that had been planted many weeks, if not months, before. The first thing they do is ignore, in all cases, the most obvious and reasonable hypothesis that is consistent with all other destructions in a very short time of buildings. And what is worse is that all of the evidence was removed. You can't do science without evidence. Unfortunately, there was a lot of evidence about the pieces that the columns were broken into, the nature of the uniform nature of the dust. But very quickly, if this is a crime, I think everybody agrees it's a crime, evidence was removed from the scene of the crime. Well, if evidence is removed, no scientist can possibly reconstruct what happened. You can't do science when you are deprived of the evidence and when your hypothesis is the least valid instead of the most likely. When the most likely hypothesis in the case of Building 7 wasn't even mentioned, this is not science. So the claim is that it's something else. It's trying to prove preconceived ideas, not having data that they could use to make a model, but to prove a model that was unprecedented in the history of buildings collapsing. So we're not doing science here. We're not doing bad science. We're just not doing science at all, is my claim. So what, to me, is most impressive, since I do microscopic work all the time, are the many, many microscopic samples that show these extremely, totally unique red-gray crystals, red and gray in the same crystal, and it was found in all the dust samples. So the preconceived notion of NIST is that there's no evidence for explosives, and so there's no point in looking. That is the most unscientific thing that you can possibly think of, not to look because you don't expect to find evidence, and in fact the evidence is overwhelming.
Jeremy Sagan is a computer programmer. He is the founder of Sagan Technology and the author of Metro, an audio, MIDI, and video sequencer for Apple Macintosh and PC computers. He is a supporter of AE 9/11 Truth and one of the signatories on the petition calling for a new investigation into the destruction of the Twin Towers in Building 7 on 9/11. He's also one of the children of the late, great science writer Carl Sagan and biologist Lynn Margulis, who appears in 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out, if you remember. I'm very happy to have this guest here on the show today. Jeremy, welcome to 9/11 Freefall.
Thanks very much, Andy. I'm a big fan of yours. In fact, I really got into the C-SPAN stuff and your other work that you've done in this. Very appreciative of it.
And I was very excited to hear that you're a fan of the show. I didn't even expect that. Now, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background. And again, being a computer programmer, I think you do have a lot to contribute to this issue we talk about every week on this show. But yeah, tell us a little bit more about your background.
Okay. Well, you want me to go all the way back?
As far as you like to go.
Okay. Well, I think in the must have been 1970s. My stepfather had like an acoustic coupler. I'm sure most people don't know what that is, but it's basically you take your telephone that has a wire on it and usually a rotary dial, and then you plug it into this modem type device that's connected to a printer, and basically it talks to a mainframe. He was connected to the UMass Boston mainframe, and the printer would print like a terminal. So there was no terminal, there was no display or anything. It would just be a printer connected to a telephone, basically. And you could communicate with the computer remotely. And so I was, a teenager at that time, or even younger, a young teen, I'd say. And he had bought me a 101 basic games. So I'd type in the games, even though I had no idea what I was doing at that time. But that basically taught me how to program because, I would type in the games and I'd see how it actually worked. And so that was my first experience with computers. And after that, I had some training at Coleman College in San Diego, and I graduated from there. I had some training at Cornell. And then in the 1980s, I co-founded a company called Turning Point Software, and we did consulting. Actually, we wrote software for the Apple II. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those. It's one of the original personal computers. And we sold software, and we also did consulting, and that turned out to be successful. I had left the company, but the company was sold in 1999, and so that was very helpful in keeping me, financially okay. And after that, I was always, during that time, I was working on my music product. I had done stuff in slide making software, and I worked for a company called Business and Professional Software. And but I was always interested when I found out that computers and music could work together. That was fascinating to me because those are my two favorite things, pretty much. And so I was working on a MIDI sequencer because the software that I had, which I had a couple of different software. I had a sequencer from Opcode and Mastertracks Pro, both good music making programs, but one of them crashed, and I called the manufacturer, and they couldn't fix it or something, and the other one was very stable, but they wouldn't add features to it. So eventually I just said, well, I got to write my own. Basically, that's what I did, and I'm not like good at marketing and sales or anything, but my specialty is development. So I have had my product for quite a while. It doesn't have a very well-known reputation just because I don't do marketing and sales, basically, so I can do my own compositions and stuff. And that's basically it.
Well, no, it's fascinating. I am not an expert on computers by any stretch. I sort of teach myself things as I need them. I've had to figure out web pages and things like that, so I'm just sort of a very on the surface jack of all trades with this stuff. But
I'm in the same boat. I mean, you're talking about like HTML. I mean, I taught myself HTML and PHP and JavaScript to do my own website. So I understand that.
Well, it's funny too because a lot can go wrong if you screw up. When I had my old news website that I still run it. That I started with. I remember spending an entire day trying to figure out how to get the little green flag to get centered on the top. I mean, it was just amazing. All of the
it's usually something really easy too. Yeah, one small thing can totally ruin everything.
It looks like an alien language or something. It's just really bizarre. But it's funny too. I remember being a kid, like very little in the 80s, with the big floppy disks that you had to stick into the computer, and then flash forward to 1992. They're talking during the Super Bowl about the internet, where they had a guy standing in a room with a computer and he's telling you the score at halftime. And me and family members that I was with at the moment were like, well, what's that all about? We didn't even know what the guy was even talking about. But I mean, look at it now, how much it's revolutionized society, and the fact that I'm able to have this show, we're able to communicate like this. It could not have happened if not for all the great guys like yourself out there making advances in this field. It's really changed the world, and I think it's going to save the world, too.
Yeah, well, I agree.
Now, how did you wake up to the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence?
Well, anyone first seeing it can see that there's something suspicious about it. I think I remember, like, at I think it was New Year 2002, I was at my friend's house, and some people were over, including the parents of another friend, and they were saying that Bush could never, ever do something like this because he was incompetent. He couldn't really do anything. But in retrospect, now I think about it, and it's true. I don't think Bush could really do it, but that's, kind of why they had him skirted off into Florida and to get him a little bit out of the way there. But I think, in retrospect, you look at that, and I think it's obvious that it's a controlled demolition. What
did you consider to be the most compelling evidence?
I think the visual evidence is the most compelling. I mean, you have, like, falling at free fall. You have molten steel coming out of the building. I mean, the visual evidence, obviously, also the evidence of nanothermite is very compelling. Oh, and also I should say the other thing that's very compelling is the fact, if you look at Building 7, the way that everything was known before it happened and reported in the media before it happened, that doesn't happen,
Well, Jeremy, it was a very confusing day, and you know that when you're confused and lots of things are going on, you instantly become psychic, too, and can predict events that never happen.
Yeah, right. That's what would have to have happened, right? It was a miracle.
Well, and that's Richard Gage's line he uses is, they cite the confusing day that was happening, but does that make them psychic? No, it doesn't. And so you have this building coming down. It should have been something that got studied, something in which all of the data used to come up with NIST's conclusions should be open to all scientists, all building professionals to study to prevent it from happening again if everything is on the up and up. But this thing that never happened before, it happens, but they're predicting it long ahead of time. People are claiming that this thing is going to come down when no steel frame high-rise has ever come down in that manner due to a fire before or after 9/11. 47-story steel frame high-rise falling in 7 seconds. And you point this out as how just watching it instinctively, it's what I call instinctive evidence. I don't even know if it qualifies as evidence, but it's instinctive. It's just, you can always tell in certain ways, with certain looks on people's faces, or just something doesn't look right. You watch this building come down and fire didn't cause this. And then when you actually start getting into the evidence, the 105 feet of free fall, the nanothermite in the dust, the extreme temperatures, then we are being lied to. And more people are waking up to it as we highlight all the time here on the show. And, again, you never know who you're reaching out to when you speak on this issue. Obviously, you came across this information. You've got a tremendous amount to bring to this discussion. I'm curious because as a computer programmer, what's your take on the fact that NIST refuses to release computer data, computer model data on Building 7, citing that it would jeopardize public safety if they did so. What do you think of that?
I think public safety is basically in quotes, and they're referring to like their own behinds, because, I mean, obviously, like you said, and like my mom said in Experts Speak Out, that, science has to be open, and that's exactly what they're preventing. So it's not science at all. And the fact that they won't release it is just proof, because science is peer-reviewed, and all the data is made available so that everyone can come to a consensus, and that's what moves us along, especially in an investigation like this. And if you're going to keep it secret, then obviously that's why you're keeping it secret,
Yeah, and again, as Richard Gage said when he was on C-SPAN, keeping this information from the public makes us less safe. Building professionals need this information to keep something like this from ever happening again. I mean,
yes, but that's, the reason is it's a cover-up, basically. I mean, we can't release data that's going to show that you're wrong. Why would you do it? You just can't do it.
I mean, how common is it for organizations or anybody conducting an investigation? I mean, you work with in a specific sector of computer programming, but is there any rational basis, especially with something like this, an event this big, to try to keep anything secret? What kind of public safety risk, and you already said this before, is they're already covering their behinds, but is there any potential for a rational basis for this reasoning as you see it?
Not as I see. I just really can't see anything. Can you? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense at all to me. Other than as a cover-up, and you don't want people to, because if they were to release the data, then people would run models, and they would show how wrong it is, and that's what they don't want. That's the only reason that I could think of. Given
the background of both of your parents, just taking that into mind for our audience and yourself too, do you have any comments on this issue, 9/11 truth, and its importance to science itself and science's integrity? I talk about it all the time on this show. What's your take on that?
Well, I don't think it's gonna. I mean, it's not going to change science. I mean, you always have times in history where people are trying to, circumvent science for their own benefit, and I think that's just another case of it here. I mean, science is not what we're seeing, and I think they would both agree on that. Obviously, my mother spoke directly about it, and I urge anyone who hasn't seen that to see Experts Speak Out, in which she talks about science and that for herself, but she can say it a lot better than I can. And also, I mentioned to you before, I have a couple of interviews that she did on the radio for UMass Amherst. She did some radio interviews that I have available, so I don't know if you want to post those or something. As far as my father goes, that's a question. I don't really know what he would think. I never heard him speak about like the Kennedy assassination or anything. He was very outspoken about nuclear winter and against Star Wars, which I guess they went ahead with anyway. But, I mean, I remember seeing him debate Richard Pearl, which is one of the people in it's the signatory to the, what's that called? The one with Dick Cheney and the calling for a new Pearl Harbor.
Oh, the Project for a New American Century? I didn't know he was on that. Okay.
Yeah, right, exactly, yeah. So I remember that. But as far as science goes, I'm not like really qualified.
Right, but what gets me, and I don't think a week goes by where I don't make this reference on this show, so you can almost make a drinking game out of it now. But the 1984, where they try to get the main character to say 2 + 2 = 5 because they wanted the government and that Big Brother wants to assert that they control reality. And so I look at this in a bigger issue, is that when you allow the government to come in and tell you that despite all of the observable evidence, provable evidence, stuff that would hold up in a court, that when they tell you that random office fires cause these buildings to come down, despite everything you know about the world and physics, you're basically letting them control reality. You're letting them change the rational basis for which we understand our universe. You're letting them become God, in a sense, if you want to get on.
Well, you have to believe that 2 + 2 = 5, you know. Like, personally, there's no way you can make me believe that. You can make me say it, but I'm not going to believe it.
And that's the situation we have now. People may be saying it, but deep down, I believe in their heart of hearts, they don't believe it. They know something is wrong.
Yeah. My brother said, you know, it's like an abuse victim. You know, you've been abused and you're in an abusive relationship, and you know abuse is bad, but you really don't want to talk about it. You just can't. You got to stay away from it.
That's right. And people are afraid of consequences. They think that the sky is going to fall if they come out and talk about this, if America acknowledges this. I've made the point so many times before, the sky is not going to fall. This would actually be one of the greatest things that America ever did, the American people ever did, in exposing this and overcoming such a tremendous stonewalling and lie. I think our future ancestors would be proud of us, would be proud of the Americans of this time for coming forward and making sure that the truth is known and changing things so that something like this couldn't happen ever again. Now, you mentioned your father, and obviously he passed away before 9/11 occurred, so he never had a chance to form an opinion on 9/11. However, in researching for this interview, I found this quote. It's actually on a meme somebody who's a fan of your father put up on the internet. But this is the quote. It says, "The truth may be puzzling. It may take some work to grapple with. It may be counterintuitive. It may contradict deeply held prejudices. It may not be consonant with what we desperately want to be true. But our preferences do not determine what's true." And I think that quote epitomizes the situation that we have right now, and really summarizes the outlook of this show and what I try to put forth. Your father put it in so many better words than I feel that I do many times, but this is essentially what the case is. Thinking that your government is lying about this event and covering it up, and some people talk about complicity of government. We don't talk about it on this show because we just want to focus on the science. It's counterintuitive to what people want to believe, and it contradicts deeply held prejudices. People have a prejudice towards wanting to believe that we're the good guys. I mean, we're taught from the very beginning that despite some problems that we've had in our past, we're a force for good in the world. When everything is all said and done at the end of the day. And we desperately want the official story to be true. We desperately want to believe that the situation is not going on and that we're not trapped.
We're not being abused, exactly. I think that's a great quote. I'm not sure where that's from, but he used to talk a lot about people's bullshit detector and how they were way too low. In fact, he taught a class at Cornell, and he would talk about that. I sat in on his class one semester, and so that was one thing, because he had to deal with people that were believing in demons and aliens, and so that was one thing he was very adamant about.
Right, and in the beginning of the Demon Haunted World, he talks about this. He talks about a discussion he had with somebody who desperately wanted to believe in Atlantis, who wanted to believe in UFOs and all of this stuff, and he had to sort of disappoint the guy because he didn't see any evidence for those types of things. But I mean, the greater point I think that your father gave to the world, an outlook that he gave, was that the real world is so fascinating that you don't need superstition. You don't need to have all this stuff. I mean, think about atoms and the DNA, the basic building blocks of life, the fact that they can manipulate it. I don't know if they should in certain cases. However, just the fact that this stuff can be done. Yeah.
Right, that's right.
It's fascinating. In astronomy, too. I mean, I have always marveled over the fact that we are so small in this greater universe, even ever since I was a kid. And I was not a very good student in elementary school, but if they stuck in an astronomy video, I always shut up and watched, because I mean, just think about all of the planets out there in the bigger existence. And now I'm watching some things. People can argue with me about the merits of it, but very qualified researchers talking about, the potential for parallel universes where physics is different in other universes. I don't know, but it's so cool. I mean, it's so cool that people can dream and grasp at these things. Science is such a miracle. That's why we need to protect its integrity. Now, when you talk about this topic, do you talk about it very often with other people, other colleagues, friends? What kind of reactions do you get?
I assume you're talking about 9/11 now.
Yes, I am. Excuse me, 9/11 Truth.
Yeah, I don't really talk too much about it. I'm wary of other people, but I mean, I do talk about it if I get a chance to. Usually, most people are believers in the official story, and they usually don't even know. I mean, unless I'm at a 9/11 convention or something, then I'm more likely to just talk about it. But I think you've covered that pretty much. That people are afraid too, and they have a nationalism.
Well, and it's funny is that they've turned nationalism into a sort of religion now. But unfortunately, I mean, and I'm all for respecting the flag and those things, but if you change the character of the nation, if you don't obey the Constitution under which our liberties are protected, if you don't defend our troops by calling BS on things like the 9/11 official story, then the meaning of that flag changes. So at the end of the day, this is my view, is that the flag itself is just a picture on a piece of cloth. What it stands for is up to the people, and if the people don't live up to the ideals of that flag, then all of that sentiment and nationalistic zeal means nothing. And so you have to actually be true to the ideals in which we were founded. And I think of our ancestry as consisting of the kinds of people who would not have been afraid to call something for what it is. In this case, the 9/11 lie. And that's what it is, what we've been given by this government. Now, I know when I started waking up to 9/11, one of the first people I started talking to about it was my mother. She was still teaching at that time, and I would get home before she did, and I would make her sit down and watch the same movies that I watched. When your mother started waking up to this, did she talk about it with you or your siblings? She was much more easy about talking about it. I was almost embarrassed when she'd talk about it in public places really loud, like, we'd go to like a Japanese restaurant and, these kind of teppanyaki where you sit at the table with other people, and she'd be talking about it really loud. And I just didn't want, people to get mad, angry if there were any. But I'm really proud of the way she's outspoken about it. She would at parties she was trying to convince people, friends. Like I had a good friend, a musician friend, and his wife. She spent like hours trying to convince this woman that 9/11 was an inside job. So I think it was great, and of course, she wanted the truth. She dedicated her life to the truth, and just because people said it was, it's not true, that would never stop her. And in many cases, and she was proved correct against mountains of ridicule. But she would always stand up for the truth, and even now she still has some theories that are still being ridiculed. And I mean, if you read her Wikipedia page, there's some nonsense on there about HIV/AIDS. It doesn't even address the issue. So I'm just saying that she's very outspoken, and she'd always go with the subject no matter what or where. She didn't care who was listening, as long as it was the truth. What amazes me is that your mother had such an illustrious background previous to 9/11 happening, and this is the story of a lot of the experts, people like Stephen Jones, who was publishing in big journals before 9/11 before anyone even heard the term 9/11, and the moment they start speaking out about this, the cogs in the machine start spinning, and now suddenly all that this person has contributed to science and society means nothing because they're talking.
And Kevin Ryan, too, definitely.
Yeah, and so all that this person has contributed, their background, I mean, these years of experience and reputation just completely mean nothing now to the establishment because...
Well, that's to say it is kind of dangerous for some people to... I mean, not dangerous in that sense, but to speak up about it, it's a risk. So you have to take a risk, I think.
Now, I was going to ask you this. We were talking a little bit about it before you started recording this. Your mother, did she, other than ridicule that we're talking about here, did she ever encounter any serious trouble for being outspoken about 9/11 truth professionally?
I've never seen it. I nenever saw anyone confront her or anything or threaten her. I never saw anything like that. But I have an enormous pride for her outspokenness, and yours, and Richard Gage, too, I should say.
Well, it's that kind of unfearful willingness to just be a human radio. That's what I call it being, where you just talk out loud. I mean, you and me could be having this conversation, waiting for our tires to be put on our cars at Pep Boys.
Oh, absolutely.
And someone could be listening who...
It would be interesting, too. It would be better than watching some stupid TV show.
Well, that's right, and it's funny. I do this, and I am not apologetic about this whatsoever. I pick my moments. I'm not talking about it every second, but if someone gives me a lead-in, I have no problem getting into it. It's almost like someone who kicks over a stone and a bunch of bees come flying out of an unseen hive, because then I will just start talking about everything. I was actually dealing with my car this week, sitting in the waiting room at Pep Boys, and a guy mentioned something about how the media is just retarded or something to that extent. He said something to that extent, and I just started going off about it, and I started talking about 9/11, and I don't think this guy expected all of this, but he was awake to some of this already, and it's amazing. You start talking to people about these issues, about the science truth of 9/11, and most people have heard of this, and most people generally agree.
I know. I mean, just look at that latest thing with, what was that, Tom... Was it Tom Williams? Is that his name?
Oh, Brian Williams?
Brian Williams, and, oh my God. It's like, this is the kind of stuff that they were doing, it's part of the cover-up.
Well, it's just, these people are some very sad people. If you actually peel away the TV spotlights and all of the bluster that surrounds their name, and you look at the human beings at the center and sitting beneath the skin of the folks that you see on the outside, some of these people have some major problems, and I would imagine that there would be some psychological issues that would come from having to read propaganda every single day, from knowing that what you're representing is not really a genuine truth-telling news service, that you're part of manipulation.
I know. The news seems to have changed a lot, but if you go back, though, have you ever seen that movie, like Evidence of Revision? There's like an 8-part video online.
I know that video. I can't recall any of it, but I do know that title, so I have watched it, yes.
It's very interesting because, like, you look at the JFK thing, and they have this guy. They have one of the top newscasters, someone from 60 Minutes. I forget which one, but he's like obviously not telling the truth, and they show that by actual video archival footage. So it's very compelling. I mean, it's very. I would recommend that series also. Evidence of Revision, very interesting.
Well, what I always found really shocking, like post 9/11, I would say, I really started to notice this, was the way that the media went after anybody that criticized the Bush administration. And the case in point I use is that there was a celebrity that criticized George Bush's labeling of Iraq and other countries in an axis of evil. He's expressing his opinion in front of other friends, but there was a camera on him, so it got on either the internet or TV or whatever. And so the next day, the Fox and Friends are criticizing this guy, but not just criticizing what he said. They're going after his personal life. They're going after how many wives he had, that he had issues with depression in the past. I mean, just going for him personally. And, it prompted me. I wasn't very socially aware at that time. I wasn't as awake to things as I am now, but it was shocking because it was seeing this. I actually wrote an email to Fox News thinking that would do something. I didn't know better. Now you see this, and it's just par for the course. It comes to be expected, and that's sad.
Yeah, the best thing to do is just not watch that crap. I just avoid it now because it's totally useless, waste of time. You're not going to get news. I mean, you can't really depend on it as news. So
no, and I have to sort of keep track of it because I do this show and I have to keep track of what's going on in the world, even if we're just talking about 9/11. A lot of things relate, but I don't. I look at it as essentially an occupying force. That it's almost like enemy propaganda now. They might as well have two heads now, because I don't consider these people being from the same planet as I do. I don't mean that in a literal sense, but it does feel like some kind of alien presence here trying to tell us to surrender every single day. I mean, they might as well be colored green.
It just seems familiar. It's like the way communism was before, like the propaganda is. The bubble's just getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah, and what's scary, though, is when people start treating it like a joke. Like when I was in the Peace Corps in Uzbekistan, something that I really noticed is that when you would actually run into the tyranny of the government in some certain way, you have a guard telling you can't pass a certain place, or in my case, we were going to have a program with the kids doing some show, and this was right after the Andijan massacre, and there was a guard standing at the amphitheater with a big automatic weapon. And he was very friendly when he saw me. He was like, Amerikansky, but we couldn't pass. And so I was a little perturbed about this, talking to other teacher colleagues, and they're just making jokes about it, It's like, oh, that's Uzbekistan. What are you going to do? But when we start making jokes about the problems, the huge problems, the fact that the government's lying about 9/11, I get nervous because it seems like an acceptance of that, almost like a surrender. Like, yeah, that's just the way things are now. What are you going to do about it? When a society starts getting like that, I start to get very concerned because I've seen this before. I see how this ends. I don't want to see us experience here in America what they did where I was overseas. What is the biggest problem? You sort of touched on this before, but we'll just quickly go over it again. The biggest problem in America, in your opinion, that's getting in the way of people becoming able to face this critical issue, being able to look at it objectively?
I think it's it's the way the money's printing. It's like you have people printing money, and they have control over the government, and they have control over everything. And it's not like if people think that, oh, well, if we could just vote, if we could vote Obama into office, everything would be great. But this Obama is not, is the same. He's just another politician. And the only people that can even debate are the people that are already pre-approved by the people printing the money, the military, industrial establishment, backed by Wall Street. And as long as that's still going on, and of course there's no end in sight, then there's really not too much you can do about it. Especially people they take the money, and it's like everyone, will trade goods for this money that you can someone is going to a printer and just printing it up. It's like there's something seriously wrong with that,
Yeah, they're just, a lot of this stuff is out of control, and I followed a lot of this too when I've been involved in when I was backing Ron Paul in the elections. But what amazed me most about the elections, forgetting any kind of ideology for a moment, is the ability of the media to pick and choose candidates, pick and choose who we hear. And this doesn't just apply to the candidates. Obviously, 9/11 Truth, the main focus of the show, this is the story of the century. I mean, this is bigger than Watergate, Iran-Contra.
Well, I don't know if you watched the debates. I think it was last election, but there was an independent debate. It carried. I think it was mediated by Larry King, and one of the women who was running for office was actually on the ballot in like 48 states or something, and she was arrested on her way to to protest the main debate between Obama and whoever he was running against. And they put her like in a black site so that she would be, down during the total time of the debate. And it's just unbelievable. This is someone who is on the ballot in 48 states, and she's not allowed to even say what's on her mind.
Right, and again, this goes to the media being able to control the events, and they essentially try to control the dialogue in American culture. I mean, there's some topics that...
Well, you say the media controls it, but it's not the media that controls it. Because someone's controlling the media.
Well, right. I mean, obviously, in that there are people who pull the strings behind the scenes. I think a lot of journalists would love to write about something like 9/11 truth, the scientific evidence. I think a lot of them would feel better about themselves being able to tell the truth. I mean, no child wakes up and says, I want to be a propagandist for the American empire.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody wakes up and says...
But they do wake up and they say, I would like to have a lot of money.
Yeah.
And if you have a printer that prints money, and you can just print it and give it to them to control them, it's so easy. It's like ridiculous.
Well, and I don't think that anybody at NIST, when they were a little kid and they were talking about what they want to be when they grow up, said, I want to oversee a major fraud and be complicit in a murder and all of that. I don't think any kid wants to do that. You want to be the good guy. Most people do when you grow up, and something happens along the way.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's right. It's corruption and, your career, and you have to fall in line, It's, when you're in a position like that. I don't know how does people get appointed to NIST, do you know?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I imagine that there's politics in every single job that you, especially when you get up to the highest levels of a particular thing. So politics probably plays into it. But, you assume that these people's qualifications are checked and are good, and they certainly, people like John Gross, who went to Cornell. I mean, they have the background. However, the science is wrong. Now, your father in the demon-haunted world. I'm going to just read a quote here. I'm paraphrase the quote a little bit. It says, out of the 535 members of Congress, rarely 1% have a significant background in science. The last scientifically literate president was Thomas Jefferson. Now, with that stated, do you personally think it would make a difference if more of our people in Congress and in the presidency had a scientific background? Or do you think peer pressure and political agendas would still win out in the end?
Well, this is sort of two questions. The first question, would it make a difference? I think it would make a difference. The problem, of course, is getting them there, which is virtually impossible because, you want, on the one hand, you want someone who's going to stand for truth, and on the other hand, you have to be a politician. And so you see there's a major conflict there. You can't stand for truth and be a politician because a politician is someone who has to please the most possible people that you can. And the only way you can do that is to not tell the truth.
Yeah, and you've got to appeal. I mean, in our modern day, it seems like we appeal to the lowest common denominator, and we have a lot of people who will vote for a certain politician based on how they look and whether or not they remind them of a certain actor they saw in a movie who played the president. Stuff like this.
You can be an actor and be elected. We've seen it 3 times already, at least, with Schwarzenegger and Reagan and Clint Eastwood.
Right, and again, I'm not trashing actors, and I'm not saying that just because somebody was an actor that they're not qualified to hold an office, but it just seems like our values are so twisted and what we look for in the people that represent us. During Thomas Jefferson's time...
But you can't even get them up, you know what I'm saying? You can't even get someone who you would want to be... I mean, when Obama first started running, I was like, oh, if we get him elected, this will be amazing. There's no way he's going to be elected. But then I realized, and this was like 8 years ago, I realized that he just changed his vote in Congress on the retroactive spying on America, the phone thing, where he's going to give retroactive immunity to phone companies that have been stealing your data. And I said, that's ridiculous. He said he was going to vote against it. Now he's voting for it. There's no way I can vote for him. So I ended up not voting for him. because I could see right away that he wasn't going to stand for what he said he was. But all I'm saying is that you can't, to get the people, into the election where they're actually on the ballot is the hard part.
Right, and people base, and I'm not saying every person, obviously. There's some very educated, very smart people out there, but most of the people who are listening to the show right now, I would say. But a lot of people, enough of them to cause problems, will base their vote on superficial things, such as, what race is this guy? Does he look like me? Does this guy, how does he sound when he speaks? And I know that's important to sound articulate, but what really matters is where they stand and if they're really going to do the things they promise to do and if they have integrity. I mean, obviously, Obama knows about this issue. I know Obama knows about this issue, folks. And it would be very difficult for him to stand up as president and say, we should do a new investigation into the building destructions in New York. But a person with integrity would do this thing. Integrity is doing stuff even when it's hard to do.
But he wouldn't be president. If he were able to say that, he wouldn't be president.
Right. I mean, that's
the whole thing with JFK.
Yeah, and see, I just had this argument with somebody earlier in the week, and they're making this point to me that, even if you want the most honest person in the world, that person is not going to get there. So, what do we do? I mean, basically, we do what we've been doing. We have to simply make the situation more awkward. We got to keep on interjecting 9/11 wherever we can.
Well, expose the truth. We just have to, we're dedicated to the truth, and we're not going to stand for accepting lies. My religion is the truth. That's what I want.
That's right, and essentially, I stand for common sense and science, because that is what is going to lead us towards that truth in the end. Is just looking at the observable facts. Now, as somebody who has, you've made a name for yourself in computer programming, and you come from a family that is very deeply rooted in the sciences, speaking to young up-and-coming people, I think this is very important. It's probably like the third time in a row on this show I've brought this up, but the young up-and-coming scientists who may be listening, what do you have to say to them regarding the importance of scientific integrity over profit and political goals, and how do you overcome these pressures to conform to poisonous ideas?
That's a very difficult question. I'm not sure I'm really qualified to answer. But to me, integrity is everything. You shouldn't give up your integrity. I mean, it's really hard to do, especially when the whole world is corrupt. But science has absolutely nothing to do with politics, and it's just trying to find out how the world works, and it advances society. I mean, without it, we wouldn't have all the technology we have today. You wouldn't be able to drive in your car and have all these fancy computers and everything. It's just it's got to be open, honest, and not secret. I don't know. I don't really know the answer to your question.
Well, I think a lot of us are trying to grapple with this right now, trying to figure out what the best way to approach our current situation is. I think science is such a miracle. I think it's so exciting. I wish I had gotten into more sciences growing up. It's one of my regrets. However, what I see now science being used to do is not liberate the people, but to imprison them in a certain way, where you see everything kind of moving towards being used to track you, being used to kill you. They're talking about these war robots, and I understand that war is a part of life, and there are certain cases where you have to fight. However, as I study history deeper and deeper, I'm figuring out that those cases in which you have no choice but to fight are rarer and rarer than at first I thought. And you see these weapons being created, things like...
usually for the king, isn't it? I mean... You have to fight for the king.
Well, that's right. It's usually a bunch of old men sending young men to go fight for them over their own little chess game. And that sounds kind of cliche because people have said it throughout time. However, people have said this throughout time because it's true. And so, I don't know what you do about that. I think that we need to keep on advancing. I think we need to keep on learning as much as we can about our universe. But we have to figure out...
Don't make it secret.
Right, we can't make it secret, and we have to figure out a way to empower independent people. I've made a choice myself doing this show. I didn't really intend to be a radio show host or podcast host. I'm just sort of doing this out of necessity, and I've learned to do a better job as time goes on, and I've made a choice that I'm not looking for, working for some corporate radio station or making a career and name out of myself to become some big celebrity. I'm just going to do this show to tell the truth about 9/11 and do it for as long as I can.
Well, you're good at it, and you have like a distinctive voice. I think that's helpful.
Well, that's yeah. I guess my voice helps out, but my point is that there's people out there who have great ideas, people who could do a lot of things, but unfortunately, a lot of times you have to go to universities or government for funding to try to make these ideas happen. We have to somehow create an infrastructure.
I remember my mom was talking about how, like at UMass, they had lots of funding coming in, but basically you had to sign a statement saying that you had to keep it all secret. So it's not really science, she would never do that, but people down the hall from her were doing it. It's like, it's not science if you have to keep it secret. It's also dangerous. I mean, especially for microbiologists. You look at those microbiologists like that guy in England who mysteriously suicided, It's not safe when it's not safe when it's closed and secret.
Well, no, and it also hinders progress because when somebody comes up with a new development and someone else can improve on it, I mean, things move faster and faster, and so we have to enable people to work independently and be able to have access to the same kinds of resources that you might have if you were working for the government or for a university. I think that people sharing stuff over the internet is a good thing. They try to demonize the internet because of a few bad apples that might do something wrong, but overall it's a good thing. People have discernment. People have the ability to separate the wheat from the chaff and figure out what's legit info, what's good stuff, what's good science, and be able to work off of each other's work, essentially, be able to improve off of each other. And that's the way civilization was founded. That's the way we
advance it. Right.
Yeah, and so I mean, this is kind of how life works. So this is just the natural way things are. And unfortunately, when somebody or an organization or establishment tries to control something, tries to put it, it's like a firefly you put in a glass jar because you want to save it as your own pretty little ornament. You might be able to have it for a little while glowing in there, but what kind of life are you creating for this thing? It's not as beautiful. And so we see that. We see science and progress and our societal evolution being held in a little glass jar by the few people that want to control things in our establishment, and that is not a good thing. So before we finish this interview, I just want to know, do you have any final thoughts, any last words you want to leave our audience with?
Well, I think that they should listen to this. They should definitely see that movie, Experts Speak Out, if they haven't. And if you can post these audio interviews, I think they're very interesting. My mom has a lot of insight into science in general, and some small, she doesn't talk that much about 9/11, but I think it will be worthwhile for people to hear this.
Well, we are going to get those out to the audience members somehow. You can send those to me after the show is done recording here. But, Jeremy, I want to thank you for coming on. I know it was I called you out of the clear blue here, but you came on, and I appreciate that. And I know a lot of people are going to be interested in hearing this interview. Thank you, and it's an honor to be on your show. I know you've had some great people on your show before, so it's an honor for me. Thank you. This program is on every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. You can also download MP3s of this show from the Internet Archive by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week and good luck.